hear you. They have to hear it through the microphone.
Can you encourage them to?
But it's the people on the live stream. Okay. I'm not doing that. I'm just introducing you. Good afternoon, everyone. Layperson's Hour is our wonderful yearly ritual of hearing from people within our own community and congregation, sharing about their world, their lives. Today, we are sharing quite the collection of worlds and lives. We have collective centuries of wisdom and learning to share from it. And the brainchild and coordinator of all of this is Judy Henderlman. And she'll be coordinating all of it.
Like this. Okay. First, I would like to introduce each of the women. We have Mildred Friedman and Pauline Kurtzman and Susan Friedman. Judaism played a very important role in each of these women's lives. Each one had experiences that were unique and interesting, and somehow or another, they all ended up here at RTFH. Each one is going to tell their own story as if they were sitting in someone's living room. So I'm not going to interrupt them with questions, maybe just to move them along and not, belabor a fact. They will each speak from what it was like during the beginnings of their Judaism journey, the middle part, and towards the end. And they really have only maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And I think each one will be very interesting. They can ask each other questions while they are speaking because they're sitting in a living room in someone's house, not here. I will only ask a question to move it along, and the audience will ask if they like questions at the end. All right. First, I would think we're going to begin with Mildred because we want to wish her a happy birthday again and have many, many more years of good health. And Mildred told me some of the things about herself that got me very interested. She comes from a very unique background, very different from many of us. And I think you will find it very fascinating for her to share her history because it is certainly different from mine. So Mildred, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My story goes way, way back. My great-great-grandparents came to this country on a clipper ship. Oh, that's right. Unaccustomed as I am to only speaking. What I said was. Better? Okay. I'll repeat what I said. My great-great-grandparents came to this country on a clipper ship during the 1840s. They came during that large immigration from Europe, along with many immigrants from Germany, from France, from Hungary, and many of the other European and Middle European countries. My great-great-grandparents, as a matter of fact, are buried here in Maimonides Cemetery on Jamaica Avenue here in Queens. I have visited the graves many times. They are the old limestone tablets that you see most of the engraving has been obliterated, but we were able to make out still their names of Sarah and Jacob Dreyfus. That was the family that I, as far as I know, that I can go back to. They died at a very early age, and my grandmother, great-grandmother, lived with a family on the west side of New York. They belonged to another Reform congregation you may have heard of, Road of Shalom, on the Upper West Side in the 80s. That family, I understand, was very active in the Reform movement. From there, this is all on my maternal side, not my dad's family at all, but the maternal side. That's where the Reform came from. When I was a youngster, we lived in Yorkville, in Manhattan, which at that time was a huge gathering, an enclave of German Jews, people from all of the European countries that had immigrated from that area, from Hungary and from Austria, and that whole area. At that time, my family was associated with the Park Avenue Synagogue on 87th Street between Park and Madison. I started religious school there. However, when I was approximately 8 or 9 years old, we moved to Jackson Heights here in Queens. And then my parents sent me to the Free Synagogue of Flushing. I started religious school there. However, I don't know the exact reason, but they were far more comfortable with the Park Avenue Synagogue and transferred me to religious school there. I continued my religious education all the way through. I was confirmed at the Park Avenue Synagogue. Some of you may know the name Rabbi Steinberg, Milton Steinberg, a very, very famous rabbi, since deceased. He was part of the Reconstructionist Reform movement, and that's where I was confirmed. Later on, when we were in Jackson Heights, my parents continued with their association with the temple in Manhattan. And then, coincidentally, we go into my husband's family. It's sheer coincidence, but there's a huge background of Reform Judaism within his family. He had a grandmother whose name was Selma Tuska, T-U-S-K-A. This family goes way, way back to the rabbinate in I'm reading from in 1847, I believe, 1849. What I'm reading from is a booklet that my son and daughter-in-law produced for the bat mitzvah of their first daughter. And it says that in 1849, Rabbi Mordecai Tuska immigrated to the United States from Hungary and became the rabbi of Temple Brit Kodesh in Rochester, New York. My husband was an upstater, came from Elmira, New York, and had a lot of relatives in the Rochester area. Rabbi Tuska's son was Simon Tuska. He came to the United States and became the first rabbi of Temple Israel in Memphis, Tennessee. This is the largest Reform temple in the Deep South in Memphis. As a coincidence, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, since deceased, were members of that congregation. So we're really steeped in Reform ritual and affiliation forever. There is, on the maternal side, there is absolutely no, I would say, no relation to Orthodoxy at all. We did not observe many of the rituals, and it was that was what we called in those years classic Reform. All very different from many of the practices that we adhere to today.
So how did you end up here?
You have to come over here.
Okay.
I don't hear you.
Okay. How did you end up at RTFH?
How do I what?
How did you end up being a member
Yes.
of this temple?
I came when Len and I were married. We originally belonged to the youth group, it was called in those years. Well, we were all very young. We belonged to the Free Synagogue of Flushing. During that period, there was a split in that congregation. Some of us went with Beth Sholem further on up Northern Boulevard, and some stayed with the Free Synagogue here, as you know, on Casino. As I say, we stayed with Beth Sholem, but eventually they had difficulty in reloading themselves and relocating in different areas. They moved to Bayside, and we were living in Jackson Heights, and it was just too much of a trip for us. And when we were first married, we didn't have a car. We used to take buses to get out to Bayside. Well, eventually that was just a little too much, so we stopped. Then I believe it was my parents at that time told me about a new congregation, a Reform congregation that was starting in Elmhurst, Corona, nearby Jackson Heights. And so we went to a service. They did not have their own building. They went from the Masonic Temple to what was called Lost Battalion Hall over here on Queens Boulevard. We held services all over, wherever there was an empty space. That was the beginning of Temple Emmanuel, and that's how we became the members there. Eventually, about 25 years ago, we came to the Reformed Temple here. The demographics changed completely in the other area, and we knew we could not keep it on any longer. That's how we came here.
Okay. Thank you, Mildred. I don't know if this is... Okay, our next speaker will be Pauline, and she has a very different background.
I sit here and I picture my apartment, the apartment that I lived in as a child. We had a huge kitchen and a huge other room, and that was it.
A little close.
And it was in Brownsville, Brooklyn. That community, Brownsville, Brooklyn. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Brownsville, Brooklyn was 98% Jewish. 98% of the population spoke Yiddish. Everywhere you went, there were signs of Yiddishisms. The newspapers, we had 4 or 5 Yiddish newspapers that was published once a week, and we used to go there just to browse. We couldn't read them because they were written in Yiddish, and at that point I couldn't read writing. Our schools, public schools, were also the same percentage, mostly not Orthodox. Nobody was Orthodox. Nobody claimed religion in their goings on. Our children, we as children, played in the street. We played ball. We bounced balls off walls. We played a stickball like anybody else. There was no education involved in our schooling. I had an incident in kindergarten where I came into a classroom and all the children were sitting on the floor, and they were 5 years old, and they were sitting on the floor and making paper chains. Now, I only spoke Yiddish at that point. I didn't understand any English. I only spoke Yiddish, and I understood it. And the teacher comes over and smacks me on my back and hits me with a 6-inch ruler. You gotta get up, you gotta get up. I didn't understand the words she was saying. She pulled me up, and I was crying. And I came home crying and telling my mother and father about it. And my father went to school the next day with me and a yardstick. He gave her what she gave me. He hit her with a yardstick. And in Yiddish, he said to her, "This will go down in history as our way of life." And I have a feeling that may have been supportive of non-tradition in the schools, non-tradition amongst the community. Now, none of us ever went to shul, none of us. The block that I lived on were 98% boys and 1 girl, me. So I used to play games with the boys. Whatever they played, believe it or not, the way you look at me now, you wouldn't believe it, but it was so. And we used to play together. We never went to shul. There was an education alliance somewhere in our neighborhood, and I wanted to join. And even at that point, I wanted to join and learn Hebrew. And my father said, "No, you can't join." It's too expensive. All they want is your money. You're not going to learn anything. And that was the extent of it. I don't know, some holiday we once went to the synagogue, and all the children came in, and we were happy that we were together. Every store in the neighborhood, Goldenberg's candy store, Bernie's kosher deli, there was no store for fish, but there was a fish man used to come around with in a truck, had ice and a truck and with fish, and used to buy the fish from there. So leading on from fish, I have another fish story. There's Mrs. Goldenberg had a candy store on my corner, and she sold candy and ice cream and newspapers and magazines and anything you want, she had. And most of the purchases were made tentatively. Payments were tentative. You came in and bought something, you said, I only have 2 cents. She said, I'll put you on the list, they'll pay me next week. Anyway, so here we are in the candy store, and I had come in to buy a Dixie cup of ice cream. It was 3 cents. And she, Mrs. Goldenberg, kept all the cold stuff in the ice box. There was no refrigerator. Ice box in the store. And I wanted the ice cream. She opened it up and she said, it's here. And she's moving something aside. Okay, what are you moving aside? Her husband comes along. Oh, wait a minute, before that. In back of the candy store was their apartment. So along comes her husband, comes in from outside, is carrying a package, and he gives it to her, and he tells her to put it in the icebox. So she did. And then he went to the back, to the apartment, and comes back with a big load of newspapers. What was the newspapers for? He said, I'm going to take what's in the refrigerator, I'm going to bring it into our apartment so we can enjoy the food. And the next thing you know, he's walking along and the paper is melting all over the floor, and what falls out? A fish. At that moment, I decided I'm never going to eat fish again. It was a live fish. They used to buy the fish in advance, bring it home, put it in the I keep saying refrigerator, in the icebox, and then you ate from there. I'm just describing the neighborhood. There's we never spoke about religion. We knew we were Jewish. We knew that, as I said, 98% were Jews. Some of the boys had bar mitzvahs, some didn't. And I remember my cousin was about to have a bar mitzvah. They hired a rabbi, and the rabbi came to the house and taught him to read, and that was it. He didn't learn anything. I didn't learn anything. Nothing. And that's the story of my beginning.
That's so big. Next speaker will be Susan Friedman, who I know nothing about because she told me it's for me to listen to the story. And she has a very different background and how she ended up here. It sounds interesting, I think.
To talk about my early years, we have to go and back to the time when my parents were born. My parents were born in America. They were born in the first decade of the 20th century. And in fact, my maternal grandfather was born in America. The family was from Germany, came over probably around 1850, 1840, somewhere around the same time. Maybe they were on the same ship. Yeah, they could have been. My grandmother, this is on my maternal side, my grandmother came on the boat from Odessa. And she was only 3 years old. So she was, in fact, very Americanized. We were all very Americanized. My grandparents were the only ones of all my friends' grandparents who had no accent. They spoke perfect English. It was an amazing thing. We all lived, the 3 generations, on the house on 74th Street, where Stanley and I presently live. My grandparents bought the house, thankfully, 100 years ago. And 6 generations have set foot in that house. And you are the first to know that on Friday night, after we came back from Mildred's celebration for Shabbos, we got a phone call that the 7th generation was born. And we are now great-grandparents. We have a new status. And hopefully the 7th generation will also set foot in the house on 74th Street. During the time I was growing up, my childhood in the house was ham, bacon. The main holiday was Christmas. We had a tree. We decorated the tree. I knew all the words to all the Christmas carols. Somehow, though, I had heard something about my being Jewish. So I went to my mother, and I said to my mother, "What does it mean to be Jewish?" And this is the answer. A Jew is somebody who believes that Jesus Christ was a good man, but he wasn't God's son. That was my definition given to me as what is a Jew. However, I think I was a mathematician even at that age, because this presents a problem. I knew that Jesus Christ, I had heard, was Jewish. So if he was Jewish, then he didn't believe he was God's son. But I remember hearing that on the cross, he said, "Forgive them, Father," which I took literally. "They don't know what they're doing. They know not what they do." So if he said Father, he did believe he was God's son. And therefore, he wasn't Jewish. So he was Jewish and he was not Jewish. This didn't sit well with me. So, okay. The neighborhood in Jackson Heights when I grew up was mostly Italian and Irish. And in the schools, you probably remember, on Wednesdays, the kids could leave to go to religious instruction. I don't know if they still have that. But Miss Bradley in 5th grade said, was very anxious to get the kids into catechism. And the 4 Jews were left in the classroom for the hour. And Miss Bradley, I don't know what her motivation was, but at one time she said to me Susan, next week is a Jewish holiday. Please explain what it is all about to the class. The mortification has stayed with me since 5th grade. So I went home and I said to my mother, I want to go to Sunday school. And my mother said, you are taking piano lessons, you are taking theory lessons. They even had, with other parents, a woman come to the house to teach a group of us French. You don't have any time for Sunday school. When I was 12, my paternal grandparents, who came to America as teenagers, but they lived in California, so I had very little to do with them. However, they were a little bit more traditional, and when I was 12, my grandmother died, and my grandfather called up my father and said, I want you to go and say Kaddish for your mother for 4 weeks. And my father said, yes, okay. And my mother said, well, I'm not interested in going. Take Susan. Wow. So when I was 12, for 4 weeks, we went to the Jewish Center of Jackson Heights, which was on Woodside Avenue, is now the Seventh-day Adventist program that I think this part, the social action, contributes to, their food drive and everything. It was the first time I had set foot in any synagogue when I was 12. And it was a complete revelation to me. I was bowled over. The prayers, the music, the cantor singing, it was just amazing. And I said to my parents, even after the 4 weeks, I want to go on Friday nights. And they said, as long as somebody walks you home. Well, the cantor lived around the corner, and he walked me home. And that was my teenage rebellion. I went to the synagogue. I went on Friday nights. I joined the youth group. I was active in Young Judea. And I went to an adult program at the synagogue and learned to read Hebrew. So that is my early years story.
Now you know why I was fascinated by hearing their stories. They're all different, but somehow or another they all ended up here at this synagogue. If anybody has any questions, I'm sure they would be happy to answer.
Hello, thank you all for sharing your stories. My grandmother's name was Pauline Kurtz, which we have discussed, and she fled Ukraine when she was very little. So it occurs to me that all of your families were very ensconced in the United States for a long time. So I'm wondering, what was your memory of the Holocaust, of seeing it in headlines or hearing about it in your various families?
She wants to know what was it like during the Holocaust living, it's on. Yeah, just puts you there.
Well, if there was anything, first of all, during the Holocaust, I was 9, 10, or 11 years of age. I wasn't really paying close attention, but they did talk. They read in those Yiddish newspapers all about what was happening in Europe, but I knew nothing about it. I think the rest of my population, my children, were kept quiet. Everything. First, something about the way we lived. When parents used to get together to talk to each other, they used to send the children, you go to the room, you go out, you don't have to listen to this. So I really never learned any of the modern, what was happening during my lifetime. Only now am I beginning to read books about it and learning what it was, but I didn't know it on my own. There was no mention of it, whatever. That's about it.
You, same problem. It's on.
My recollection is very similar to Pauline's. Our parents didn't talk about it. It was not one of the topics of conversation. The only thing that I remembered probably later was my grandfather, my father's father, came to America first, and he had 5 sisters, and he brought them over one by one from Europe. And he managed to get all 5 of them over here before the war, except that Tanta Rosa didn't like America, and she went back. All of the family was very upset that she went back. But she said, no, this is not my country, I'm going back to Germany. And sadly, she wound up in Theresienstadt and was killed in the Holocaust.
Do you think your mother wants
I don't get it.
They want to know what's going on with the family during the Holocaust. During the Holocaust,
Where was the family?
and what you
Yeah.
remember, and what you remember.
My father's family, unlike my maternal family, came from Germany. Before the Holocaust, in 1933, at the beginning of the Hitler regime and the horrible things that happened thereafter, we visited my family in Germany. They were in a very, very small town in southern Germany, near the French border, near the Rhine. And I was a young child at that time, and I remember that a youngster from the neighborhood came into my grandmother's backyard, and with the Nazi flag, and she took a broom at him and beat him over the head to get him out of the backyard and out of her way. That was my beginning with the Holocaust. My father had 3 siblings. The one of the brothers came to the United States approximately at the same time as my father, which was before 1918, way back. He had 2 sisters. One sister was married to I was told, a very famous dentist in Berlin. And I remember distinctly during the Hitler days that my father pleaded with his sister and family, leave Germany, get out of the way. You will be absolutely devastated. All the bad things. They, and unfortunately many others also, felt the same way. They were German, and they were loyal to the German government, and nobody was going to touch them. Need I tell you what happened? That they fortunately were able to come eventually to the United States after escaping from Berlin, way across Russia to the Black Sea, to Shanghai, to Cuba, and then eventually to the United States. After living here for a while, my aunt's husband was unable to find the kind of work that he needed here. He was, as I said, a dentist in Berlin, and of course it did not pass the exams here in the United States, and they emigrated to Israel, and that's where they both died. I had a grandfather who remained in Germany, passed away long before the Holocaust. I have no memory of that at all. However, my grossmutter lived with us in Jackson Heights for a number of years because my father had brought her over, and it was during the early 30s when things were starting to go downhill for German Jews, and he did not permit her to go. I don't know what happened to her visa or what, I don't have the particulars, but she never went back to Germany. She stayed with us. As far as the Holocaust was concerned, Judy asked me about the relationship. My dad was responsible for bringing over a number of families during the Hitler regime, coming over to the United States. And that was how, it's a curious story, that was how I eventually met my husband, because he brought over a family from Germany who eventually settled in Elmira, New York, and I visited this family at one point when I was, I guess, maybe the first year in college, and met my husband through them. That was my connection.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay, then you have check. What? Yeah. They were all in temples that merged, right? The merger. Yeah. They were the merger.
Susan and I were both on the committee to go shopping for synagogue. We found
Right.
last resort, but the best resort.
Right. Pauline and I and the late Ed Wolf, some of you may remember, we were shopping for synagogues, and we came here and we went to services in Beth Shalom.
Yeah, that's what
Remember?
That was a very interesting experience. We come in and said, "Oh, we're gonna be talking to you. Go upstairs to the balcony, have a cup of coffee, and we will come." We're still waiting.
But we were so warmly welcomed here. by Marsha Weinroth, and we were very much taken by the rabbi, remember, and Rabbi Perlmutter. And there was really no question that this was the place that we wanted to join.
Even though when we came to the initial meeting, it was not in this building, it was Temple Isaiah, and the whole area was we would say liquidated. It was wet because
It was wrecked, yeah.
It's flooded.
So that was, and Mildred is from Temple Emmanuel, which we were from Congregation Beth Hillel. Those were the two smaller groups. We had read in, I think it was Jewish Week, that Temple Sinai and Isaiah were getting together. And when I read this in Jewish Week, I said to the people, you know, I think that should be our solution. Let's see what happens. And we came down, and the rest is history. 26 years later, 28 years later, right?
Susan and I are still here.
And we're still, yes, we're still here. And Lillian Kowalski was a member, is still here. And sadly, Bobby Ennis and her parents, if you remember Belle and Morris, they were very, very strong supporters and movers of this temple.
At the very top. The largest amount of people, congregants at a time, was 50. That's how large we were. And it was a cleanser hut. It was something like a cleanser hut. We knocked out all the windows, we put in the Torah box, and we laid the carpeting. I was down on my hands and knees putting down the carpeting. We put it together, handmade, and it was a wonderful place. We loved it.
Yeah.
But each one of us basically came from the same environment. Each one of us came from the same environment as we spoke about.
So I've only known each of you for 10 years. But in those 10 years, Mildred, you were working with the bar and bat mitzvah families on the oneg and the flowers. And Pauline, you were teaching adult bar mitzvah students and others Hebrew. And Susan, you've been giving a Devar Torah and reading Torah every year. What is it that at this point in your life still gets you to be so active and committed in your Jewish life?
I won't go back to my middle years because they were very, very busy. Stanley and I got married when I was 18. I finished college. I got my master's degree, had 3 children, got a PhD, and so on and so forth. Very, very busy. And my Judaism was put aside. I had no time for anything I made, except getting up early, which I hated, to bring the kids to Sunday school. But afterwards, I retired early in 1998, and I've spent the last 24 years studying Judaism. So I've taken courses. Some of you have joined me in the courses that we've taken. They've been under Reform auspices, under Conservative, under Orthodox, taken many courses in Jewish history, in Jewish culture, in all kinds of things. So you have something?
I moved into Northridge, the co-op in Jackson Heights, and in the area, we had 4 or 5 buildings around the 4 or 5 buildings around a garden area. And a woman comes over to me and says to me, "Are you Jewish?" I said, "It's kind of interesting." "Yes, I am." She says, our little temple is having a sisterhood Sabbath Friday night. Would you like to come? I said, no. She said, why? I said, I've never been to a synagogue in my life. I wouldn't know what to do there. She says, try it. You may like it. Well, I went, and it was a sisterhood Sabbath, and I regret the fact that I did not copy it, and I did not bring it along with me, because it was really very nice. And I kept on coming every Friday night without a stop from what year was it? Well, whatever year it was until now. And I'm still going to continue. Want to say anything? No?
Okay, I'd like to thank all three women who, of course, did a fabulous job, and thanks the audience that responded.
Thanks again, and thanks to Judy, who really put this all together and made this happen. We have a little break now, but at 2 o'clock downstairs in a classroom that is on that pink sheet of paper, and I don't know what room it is. Classroom 3 downstairs is our adult study session led by Lois Silverman and Barbara Liederman. And they're also simultaneously, per the request of Mildred Friedman in the past, we have a quiet room, a room where you can just go if you just need nothing. You just need to be on your own. That's there too. Afternoon services begin at 3:15. Yizkor will begin at around 4:30 and then run through the rest of the afternoon. Thank you all. Gemar Chatima Tova, Shana Tova to everyone.